check. Just tell me if it's...
We're just doing a sound check. That creaking sound you heard is Heidi getting off the table.
Alright, so we are back today on Facebook Live for News Engagement Day, which is today. And thank you to our readers for sending in and commenting with your questions yesterday. Today we have YP Cadet Nike, who will be asking the questions on your behalf, and back joining us is our editor, Susan.
Hi.
Hi. Alright, let's start.
Okay, so the first question. Is it annoying that the news is now being transferred to social media and that newspapers won't be read anymore?
Annoying? Sad, maybe. Only because personally I'm a print person. I grew up with, my dad was printer and his family were printers. But no, it's not annoying at all. It's incredibly exciting because it allows us to do so much more with the news. Yeah, we can add videos, things can move around and stuff like that.
Yeah, okay. Second question. Is it tough and risky as a journalist to go to a dangerous country?
Yeah. Well, yes, of course it is. But journalists do take precautions. They do try not get shot because it tends to ruin their careers. But that's one kind of danger. In other countries, journalists are in danger from their own government, and that's a little bit more difficult to deal with.
Okay. How do you deal with threads made in relation to a story?
With threats?
So I'm guessing threads as in like if people try to sue you for writing a story against them or something.
Okay, well that's one of the advantages of being a professional journalist and having a large news organization behind you, because they employ lawyers.
Yes.
So that they more or less take care of it. But if you're on your own, if you are not part of a big news corporation, then you need to be really careful because you can be sued and it can cost you a lot of money.
Yes. What is the press freedom like in Hong Kong?
Everything's relative. So if we put Hong Kong up against Norway or Sweden or somewhere like that, then it's not very good. But if we put it up against places like the mainland China or Uganda or other places like that, then it is good. So it's all relative. There's been a lot of changes, and we've had to do a lot of reframing the way that we look at things, because this used to be a British colony, and so people believe that the press was free, but that's not necessarily true. So there's been a change in government, and so that change is being reflected in news coverage.
Okay. Besides the subject of the articles, how is publishing a newspaper directed towards teenager different from newspapers for adults in terms of language and writing, etc.?
Okay, that's a difficult one. Mostly because print is very difficult for teenagers to deal with. But most of it is making the subject relevant to them. So something that they want to read about, and that's half of the battle won. And then the other half is to make the language more relatable to them.
So more casual, would you say?
More casual is good. We don't go very casual with Young Post because a lot of schools use us to teach English. So we can't get all slangy and like, oh my God! Except on holidays, which is where we can do that. So we do try to, and also we try to be very careful about the way that we explain things to our readers. Not that they're stupid, or anything like that. But we can never assume that our readers have the same knowledge that adults have. So for instance, if we're doing a story about Libya and we mention Muammar Gaddafi, we can't assume that our readers know who that is. So we have to put in a little, very short explanation as to who that is, and then they can continue with the story.
And so has the information ever varied while you were telling, if you were writing an article? Would it be different if you were giving information to an adult or a teenager?
Yes, it would. Yes, of course it is. Of course it is. Because they want different things from the story.
Yeah.
But also, I think with Young Post, I am particularly more careful about the kind of content that I will print. Because there's a lot of bad stuff out there, and I don't think that young people should be wallowing in it. It's not that we're hiding facts or anything like that. It's just the stuff that makes up the daily currency of news is not always important for young people.
Okay. Next question. Is it very tough to find interviewees as a journalist?
That depends on who you ask, really. I think if you ask some of my reporters, they would say yes, because they get extremely frustrated because of the deadline issue. So they need people to respond to them really quickly. So if you write to us, or if you want a story done and we ask you a question, you can't get back to us in 2 days' time. We need to know fairly soon. So they would say yes, that is quite difficult. And in Hong Kong in general, it's quite interesting that people are not very willing to be made public, to speak to the media. However, we do have a very extensive junior reporter network. So those youngsters can always get us interviewees and things like that. So
yes.
it pays off in the end.
Okay. Other than interviewing, editing, publishing, are there any other skills a journalist should have?
I think I covered this yesterday when I said they need to be people. They need peopling skills. They need to be able to talk to people from beggars to kings and to treat them all the same.
So good communication.
More than good communication, they need to be able to really deal with stars and deal with people that they don't like and people that they need to put aside their personal feelings and be able to talk to them in a way that encourages them to talk back. Because being a journalist, it's not about your conversation, it's about what the other person has to say. So you need to be able to get that from them.
Okay. How do journalists make sure that they have given credit to all their sources? What happens if you make a mistake and publish it without giving credit?
Okay, so it's two questions in one.
Yes.
How do we credit all our sources?
Yes.
If we had to include every single credit, like you guys have to do with your exams and your essays for school, the news would be really boring. Okay, like really boring, because you'd have, the sun is going to rise tomorrow according to the Hong Kong Observatory, and such, and then another, take up of space for credit. Luckily, we deal with a lot of news agencies.
Mm-hmm.
So they do all that kind of stuff for us, and then we just have to credit them. So they might get their information from several sources, but we just need to say Associated Press said.
Mm-hmm.
If we get it wrong, we wouldn't go back and publish a correction unless it was something quite serious. Because again, it comes down to, if you had to do that for every story, you'd have no other news in the paper a lot of days. So yeah, if it's important, we would.
Okay. Another question would be, how do journalists prevent the invasion of privacy when publishing breaking news stories?
That's a difficult one, because you have to be able to make a judgment. And it also depends on the kind of media company that you work for. A lot of media companies don't care about people's privacy. They don't care about people's dignity. And they don't care who they hurt to get their information. But if you are truly a professional, you will care about those things. So you need to, again, use your peopling skills to be polite and to get people to talk to you when and as they are ready. If you can imagine maybe somebody is killed in a car crash, and then you go around and you shove a camera and microphone into their parents' faces, that's just awful. That is really awful. There is nothing that they can tell you that's worth the hurt that you are bringing to them. So that's your judgment that you need to make. It doesn't, people don't remember those things if they read them in the paper. You know, it's kind of like 3 days and somebody's forgotten about it, but that person is hurt forever. So you have to be very careful about things like that.
Okay. Do journalists have to ever pay for their access to speak to people, such as in interviews?
Sometimes they do. Not so much having to pay for access to speak to people, but sometimes people want money for information. And generally the rule is no. Okay? But let's be honest about this. If somebody came along and said to you, listen, I have got Trump's tax files and I'll sell them to you for $10,000 US, that wouldn't be enough possibly to ruin your reputation as a journalist or as a media company. But if it was something bigger than that, yes, certain news media pay for things all the time. This is why you have the situation with Paparazzi, which a lot of pure news journalists don't like, but this is what readers like, and this is proven because people buy those things. You know, people want to see the pictures of, I don't know, Pippa Middleton kissing somebody or whatever. And they buy those kind of publications, and so as you have an open market, so you have journalists or people that are willing to cross the line.
I was going to leave the questions from the comment section to the end, but this actually relates directly to one we just got. Is there a difference between journalists and paparazzi?
They would like you to think there isn't, but there is. Journalism is something that is a serious business, and harming someone and chasing them and hounding them for that one specific shot is not journalism. It doesn't inform anybody of anything. It doesn't move anything forwards, and really at the end of the day it does a lot of harm to people who don't deserve it. They simply happen to be in the public eye. So I would say that there is a difference. People have to make a living, and it's a really tough job. But do you know what the name paparazzi means?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, I do. I am. I do.
You do? No.
Okay, so paparazzi actually means pest.
Oh, yeah.
And that's exactly what they do, is they are pests. Yeah.
That's new information to me. Okay, next question. Has there ever been an instance ever that the newspaper was paid to report a biased story?
You mean like advertising?
No, like a
That's
biased...
like a whole industry. You know, I'm not going to deal in absolutes here. I'm going to say I hope not. But I can't say for definite, because the minute that you say something so definitive, somebody's going to pop up and say, but this and this. However, we've seen with the rise of the internet and technology, and specifically the fact that people are not willing to pay for their news. media corporations have to do what they can to earn money. And so they do sell what they call native advertising, which is a story that looks very much like a genuine news article or feature article. However, those that are honest will mark those articles as sponsored feature, or as we do in Young Post, or they will make it clear within the text that they've been invited to such and such a place to go and cover a story.
Okay. How do you know whether you should trust the source?
Whoa, that's a difficult one. We've seen journalists that have really been burned by trusting the presidents of countries, trusting their press people, and things like that. It comes back to building relationships with the people that you're dealing with. And again, I'm going to come back to those news organizations because they have people on the ground where we can't reach. So South China Morning Post, for instance, doesn't have somebody in Kenya. Now, if there is a story in Kenya, people like Reuters and Agence France-Presse and Associated Press will have journalists there, and those will be trusted employees. So when that story comes in, you can trust that it's come from a professional source, and then you can use it.
Okay. How do you choose which story to run? What do you base it on?
That's very subjective, actually, and it's become a topic of much discussion in newsrooms. As I pointed out yesterday, news used to be a one-way conversation. It was decided by the editor what the story was that people were interested in, what they needed to know, and they would publish it. But these days we can see through various programs that we use in conjunction with websites, we can see immediately whether or not people like a story. And so if we publish a story online and nobody looks at it, it would be fairly silly then to put your resources to further investigate that story. So you'd have to, people who read the news actually have a lot more say in what stories are published.
This is a very wide question, but how do you find news?
Oh, I explained that yesterday as well.
For those who are tuning in today.
For those who are tuning in today. Okay, I'm just trying to remember what I said yesterday. So reporters have certain sections that they work on. And they get used to working in those sections, and they make contacts in those sections. So they learn the movers and shakers in that particular area, such as sport or finance or whatever. And they make sure that they stay in touch with those people so that when there is something happening, those people will get in touch with them. Or when their gut instinct tells them that something is going on, they can contact those people and confirm it. So that's sort of the most important way that we get stories. But also, journalists are, excuse me, by nature they're curious people. They want to know why things happen. They want to know what's going on. And so, excuse me, they look around them and they ask questions. And because they know the people in that beat that they're working in, they know who to ask. And so I think I used the example yesterday of a journalist saying, why is it that we still have ivory trade in Hong Kong? And then asking questions about it. Excuse me.
While you're recovering, I also want to add, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think as a journalist, journalists tend to develop a sense of things.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, let's say right after Occupy or the June 4th vigil, I mean, we knew that we had a sense that if anything's going to happen, it might be on the day, so we send people there to keep an eye on things, and if there's something that happened, then we would be there to report it live. So you develop a sense. A lot of it comes down to instinct, I think.
Yes, and also watching the social chatter that's going on around a particular subject.
Yeah, and that goes back to your first question about social media. It helps shape journalism a lot because it affords us the opportunity to see what our readers are paying attention to and what matters to them, so that helps as well.
Okay. Next question. Is journalism anything like Spotlight or the newsroom?
All right, so I have never seen Spotlight, I will confess to that. And I am a newsroom junkie. Although I do find it a little bit holier than thou. And yes, it is a fair bit like newsroom. You have very passionate and very committed people who have a massive social conscience, who want to improve the world or to protect people from things that are happening that might do them harm. And so if you become a news journalist, it's not just a 9-to-5 job. You're never off duty. And a lot of people these days don't want that kind of career. But this is really what it is. It's impossible for a story to break and a journalist to sit around and do nothing. And we find this quite often at SCMP when there's a big story. You'll see that people will just start arriving at work because they just can't sit at home. It's impossible.
A journalist's mind never rests.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Okay. Has the job market for journalists changed? Where are journalists getting jobs now?
Yes, it has. It's changed significantly because you've seen a lot of papers go under. And that's quite sad in so many respects, because it means that when you lose a newspaper, it's like losing an ecosystem in a local area. It's all well and good to turn to Facebook for your news or to BuzzFeed, but that is not particularly local. So that's going to be more of a global picture of things. And it comes back to the trust that you have in your news source. So a lot of journalists have lost their jobs, and that's extremely worrying. But for new journalists that are coming into the workforce, I think it's an extremely exciting time because they now have more control over their stories than ever before. And they can plan exactly what those stories are going to look like, what the video is going to do for them, what the pictures are going to do for them. It's more of beginning to end planning for the journalist. So, yes, they require different skills, and I'm sure that the universities are providing them with those skills. But the best kind of thing to do is to get into it and to start working with it and understanding what it is.
Okay, so the last question for today is, what's the most important quality of a journalist? It's a good question to end. I'm guessing it's a hard question.
It is a hard question because my first instinct is to say justice. And having a sense of justice, but that's quite arrogant. For me personally, I come from Africa, if you hadn't known that yet, and I find that a lot of things that people from Western backgrounds tend to think they think in a very different way to people that have maybe not had such an easy life. So I am going to say you have to be tough and never give up. And I hate that I say that because it sounds like such a line. And stay curious. all the time. Stay curious.
So we have a few questions from the comments section. Do you need a journalism degree to be a journalist?
That depends on where you're going to be a journalist. For places in Hong Kong, because the field is quite small and competitive, you need some sort of degree before you're going to be looked at by a larger news corporation. But I would say, and I'm sure that somebody will pop up to correct me, that these days, if you went to a news organization with 300,000 followers on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, that you would be given very serious consideration to be hired. In other areas, you don't need a degree. You don't have to have a degree.
You mentioned degree, so not particularly a journalism degree, but a degree.
Yeah, a degree. I always tell youngsters that ask me this, they're all like, oh, should I go to university and study journalism? Yes and no. It's good to study it at university, but it's always better to have something else that you're specialized in. So if you are interested in finance or business, then do a finance or business degree and become an expert, because you're far more valuable as an expert in that area than being able to put a couple of words together. And so you can carve out a better career for yourself that way.
Okay. Do you ever look at Reddit for story ideas?
Me personally, no. Never.
Okay.
I've heard it's quite good though.
What kind of preparation do you have to do before interviewing someone?
So, you know, news is very much about time, and you need to do what you can in the time that you've got to find out what you can about the person. So you don't want to interview someone and ask stupid questions, right? So, for instance, imagine if you were going to interview Alan Zeman and then you go, so, do you know anything about Ocean Park? You'd look really stupid and you've wasted his time. So it's always a good idea to have some idea of what you're going to ask the people that you're talking to.
I feel like that's a sign of respect for your own organization as well as respect for your interviewee
Yes.
to do your homework.
Yes.
Yeah. And to make the best use of your and his or her time.
Yes.
Okay. I think this is the last question. When we're doing an article on a specific product or company, how do we make sure that it doesn't end up turning into an advertisement or a press release?
That's a difficult one, because the minute that you say doing an article for a company, that is an advertisement.
Mm-hmm.
It is a press release. So this is where editorial and advertising wrangle all the time, actually. So if it is not marked as specifically being a sponsored feature, if editorial has control of it, then the person that writes it can say what they like, and they do. And I'm thinking about specific reviews and things like that. Somebody's got a restaurant that might have a new menu. Our reporters go along and they're like, oh, I hate this stuff, never want to eat it. Well, they have to be able to say that, but they can say it politely. And so that is where the big divide comes in between advertising and editorial.
So remain objective.
They need to remain objective, yes.
Okay. What keeps you interested in the job?
Everything. Everything. News is incredibly addictive. It's very addictive, and you just have so many unfinished stories that you just want to know what happens. Like, everybody wants to know what's going to happen on November the 5th, right? Is it going to be Trump? Is it going to be Clinton? Is the world going to end? That sort of thing. So that's what keeps me interested, is the world keeps on moving, and it has very interesting stories to tell, and I like being part of that.
Okay. Well, like yesterday, we still have a newspaper to finish.
We do.
And Nayeka, you mentioned that you are interested in journalism, so I hope that this chat has helped you and help you understand.
A lot, actually.
Okay, awesome. So thank you again to everyone who tuned in, and good afternoon.
Bye.